Welcome to Utah Stories. So today on the show, we've got a very important guest, an awesome lineup. We've got former Mayor Rocky Anderson chiming in on all of the big hot button issues that are affecting Salt Lake City, the quality of life, kind of all about his candidacy running against existing incumbent Mayor Aaron Mendenhall. And if you're not familiar with Rocky Anderson, he was mayor of Salt Lake City for two consecutive four-year terms, I believe from 1998 to 2006, something like that. But really excited to have him on the show because there's some big issues that a lot of people need to know about, and those are concerning homelessness and the homeless policies in our state. And we're going to go over that, especially the continued policy, which was an emergency measure called abatement. And if you're familiar with the mosquito abatement tax we pay on property taxes, I find it really telling that we use that word, that verb to describe it. And the county and the city uses that verb, abatement, like we need to exterminate homeless people. And it's so unbelievably inhumane and unkind, and it's leading to the deaths of homeless people who really have no other option than to be on the streets. And I want to get into that because I think a lot more people need to know about that. And I really hope this episode gets shared and liked and people subscribe to our channel because of that issue primarily. I just think that we need to be informed voters when we make these important decisions, and we need to know what is really going on. And so I'm happy to show you what's going on, and we're going to get into that in about 24 minutes here. Rocky's going to arrive. But before we do, I wanted to do a little pre-show. And sometimes I like to think about the things that are big national issues that I wish more graduates knew about, things that I wish I knew when I was graduating from college. I graduated from the University of Utah when I was 25. I took the 7-8 year route to get my degree. And as Tommy Boy said, those are what they were supposed to be called doctors. I wasn't a doctor. I just took a long time because I actually had a full-time job and I was at the community college for like 6 years. But anyway, so Utah Stories, if you know about us, we report on important local issues, hot button issues. The magazine is more fun. It's more about where to go, what to see. But online, our mission is to report on homelessness and housing, affordable rents for the working class. In short, our mission is to preserve the socioeconomic ladder. And if you're familiar, the socioeconomic ladder is our ability to climb from the bottom and get to the top. And when I describe that, I think a lot about my great-grandfather who came over here with nothing at all, who was a ditch digger most of his life. He came from Armenia. His whole family was slaughtered. But he never really amounted to a lot, but he raised 9 children who all did incredible things with their lives. They all went to college, most of them, and they all succeeded because they had this dream that they could take the freedoms and opportunities that existed in America, they could climb out of poverty, and they lived in a tiny shack raising 9 kids in Murray, Utah. I can't even imagine how difficult it was. My grandpa used to pick up coal in the train yard with his older brother just to heat the home, and they did it. It's just this amazing thing that happened thanks to America and this ladder existing. So I think preserving that ladder that people can climb from the bottom and get to the top is extremely important, and that's what this podcast is dedicated to. So I find it really troubling that if you are graduating right now in 2023 from the University of Utah, really, unless you're somehow getting a job for $60 to $70K a year, you really can't afford to live in the Salt Lake Valley. It's like the housing costs are completely out of control. And I really feel for these people because when I graduated from university, I was super lucky. I bought a house almost right when I moved out of my parents' house because my dad was a realtor. He found me a fixer-upper. I fixed it up. I filled it with roommates. The roommates basically covered my mortgage, and I just kind of lived for free. I had to clean the house. They were often very sloppy, but it was an amazing opportunity for me. And then when I graduated, I could afford a little bit more, and I only had to have one roommate or two roommates. And but I can't imagine graduating right now and knowing if I don't make like 50, 60K, I'm going to be putting at least half of my income into rent. And then you can't really have money to set aside, and that really impacts your ability to be able to afford a property, pay off your car, pay off your student loans, and pay your bills. So I think that preserving that socioeconomic ladder really has to be a focus more of the media, because right now in a lot of cities in the United States, that ladder is just simply gone. So here's some issues that I think that people need to know more about why we are in the position that we're in. Issue number one, inflation. A lot of people don't really understand why it's actually happening or what is causing it. Now, when you talk about inflation, a lot of people want to say, oh, it's inflating prices. Prices are getting inflated. But that's actually not exactly true. What is true is that we've inflated the supply of money in the system. And that is the result of the Treasury Department, which is under the Joe Biden and prior to that Donald Trump administrations. Janet Yellen is the Treasury Secretary, saying that we need more money to fund the government, and going to the Federal Reserve and saying, you need to give us a greater supply of money, and they need to raise the debt ceiling in order to do that, because we need to be able to pay our bills. And so right now we've got something like $33 trillion of national debt, and our debt ceiling keeps increasing more and more. I think I don't know exactly the figure, but I think our budget is something like $4 or $5 trillion to fund the federal government. And a lot of people just don't understand that is because of what that's because of the monetary policy of the Treasury Department, or the fiscal policy of the Treasury Department, and the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. And I'm not going to deep dive into that in this episode, but I really suggest you learn more about it, because as you put your money in the bank and you think it's going to, be valuable, the really disappointing thing right now is that the consumer price index, which is the measure of how much inflation is occurring in the marketplace, has really blown out. It's now, something like 6-7% annually. So, and that measurement doesn't include housing costs, which I think is totally insane. It doesn't include vehicle costs either. If you look at the cost of vehicles from just 5, 6, 7 years ago compared to today, vehicles have pretty much doubled, as has housing, and those aren't in the consumer price index. And so I really find it's not an accurate number. It's not an accurate measurement to say that what the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department's going by, that it's 7%. I think in reality, we're looking at about 25% actual inflation, and your money is losing value at an alarming rate. And on our next issue of Utah Stories, we talk about the impact that's had on farming and agriculture, how these farmers who live in rural places all over Utah, their land used to be worth very little, and the outputs they put from their farm, that's where they got all their value. And today, those farmers are finding if they have, a 5,000 acre farm where it used to be $250 an acre back when they bought it, maybe in the early 1970s, that $250 an acre farm is now something like $100,000 an acre, and they're all millionaires if they just sell out. And so we're selling more and more of our farmland, and that those farms that were absolutely viable and really critical to our agricultural economy, they're being completely sold out. They're being completely lost now to developers who are just going to build mansions for rich people. And my question in our next issue of Utah Stories is, where are we supposed to be getting our food from if all the rich people are buying up farms as their little side hobby? And Bill Gates is now the largest farmer in the United States. I don't know if you knew that, but he owns far more farmland than any other person in the United States. And Jeff Bezos realized, wow, that's a great idea. Yeah, just buy up all the farmland with your billions of dollars. And they're keeping most of the farms intact. They're not opening them up to have, wealthy people build their mansions on. But as I've covered agriculture here in Utah, I found that a lot of the best farms and the best farmland in Utah is getting turned into mansions for tech millionaires. And I noticed that in Alpine, Utah, with the last family orchard that was up there. And now it's happening much more in Summit County. We've got a story about the last dairy farm in Utah closing, and that's all a result of inflation. And so the inflation is caused by the Federal Reserve writing IOUs to itself. It's really a convoluted, difficult thing to understand. But when our government decides to take debt, it is a function of the Federal Reserve, which is not a government agency, which essentially is a banking cartel with the biggest banks who all get together and they decide how to manage the Fed. They all get together and they say, okay, we're going to lend out money and we're going to set a prime interest rate based on how much inflation is occurring. And if the inflation rate is high, they need to raise that prime interest rate really high because they need to account for the debt payments that they have to make. And so they keep raising and raising and raising that interest rate, hoping that inflation is going to go down, that our economy will slow down. Like they're actually hoping for a suppression of the economy, but those numbers are not going down. People are buying more and more stuff with money. It's like the definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. And so as long as people keep spending and spending and spending, there's just and people don't believe that saving their money is a good idea, which it isn't if there's inflation, then inflation will just keep happening and happening. And so what can you do about it? I think that the billionaires, they're buying up all the land, all the farmland, to place a hedge against inflation, to take their giant, massive bank accounts and to say, okay, I'm going to put all my money into the land and buying farmland because I know this money, if I leave it in this bank account, it's just going to keep losing more and more and more of its value. So they want to buy land because land is scarce. They're not making any more land unless, I guess, you live in Holland and they can make more dikes. But we don't live in Holland, and I don't think we're going to get more land from the Great Salt Lake. And I don't think anybody would want to live there. But it's a problem that they make inflation so highly convoluted that I don't think most college graduates even grasp it or understand it. And you might be thinking like, oh, it's so great when the government writes me this stimulus check and they give me this money during COVID. I mean, if you wiped away all those stimulus payments and you took all that out of the equation, we wouldn't be having any inflation right now. That is the cause of it, because the government wanted to just be, I guess, benevolent to everybody who needed the money, and the money ended up not going into the pockets of the people who really needed it. It ended up going into the pockets of the people who didn't need it, the biggest corporations in America. And unfortunately, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. Our working class is shrinking, and our workforce is shrinking. And so it's all due to inflation. And so if we all understand this, I think we might stop asking the government for more and more and more stuff. And we might realize that we're actually just ruining all the value of the money that we have in our bank accounts if we are asking the government for more money. And I think to take on more government debt, to raise this debt ceiling ever more, the Democrats are calling for that. The Republicans are calling for decreases in spending. I am a fiscal conservative for sure, because I understand that if you just simply try to spend more and more money, it's got to come from somewhere. There's just no way you can create money out of thin air and think that that's not going to have a greater impact on the money supply. All right, so the item number 2 that I think everybody should know about is that the alphabet soup of government agencies, they're really been completely bought off by giant corporations. I really kind of stumbled into this when I first started Utah Stories, looking at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And I think we need an FDA. I think there has to be an administrative agency in charge of regulating food and drugs. But the problem is, in reality, if you've heard of the corporation called Monsanto, they genetically engineer corn, wheat, and soybeans, and I believe other crops as well. They're in the genetic engineering business, and they're in the business of creating chemical fertilizers as well as pesticides and herbicides. The man who was the chief of Monsanto was named Michael Taylor. Guess who was appointed to be the chief of the FDA when Obama took office in, I don't think it was the very beginning of his term, but somewhere around 2006 or 7, Michael Taylor was appointed to be the chief of the FDA, the same man who was the chief of Monsanto, who creates genetically engineered corn, wheat, and soybeans, and produces Roundup and Roundup-ready crops that are genetically engineered so they can just dump Roundup on them and they'll still grow. Michael Taylor was put in charge of our Food and Drug Administration. Now, they call it the corporate bureaucratic merry-go-round, where people take positions in corporations, then they get the high-up positions in bureaucracies. They go back to corporate America, back to bureaucracies. Of course, that is not going to produce people in the Food and Drug Administration, in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, who really have consumers' best interests at heart. These people are bought off. I think if you were going to try to create a really great FDA, you would probably take a nutritionist and make that person the chief, not the guy who's got tons of stock in a company that produces chemical fertilizers and genetically modified crops. And do I believe that genetically modified crops are evil or awful? I don't think that they're necessarily terrible, but it's interesting that European countries and even Africa have banned most genetically modified crops. And I find it also interesting. I have asthma. I get it really bad when I eat a lot of gluten, so I try to stay away from bread. I don't get that when I eat European bread. I really find it interesting. I don't know if it's just psychosomatic, if I'm just like, oh, this genetically modified crap, I can't have it. But when I go to Europe, I'll eat a lot of like pizza and bread and stuff. I don't get asthma, and I don't know what it is. But they don't produce genetically modified wheat in Europe, and so I kind of think it has something to do with that. And what I also don't like is we have trade arrangements with Europe, and what our FDA chief and our Monsanto and giant corporations that are middlemen, they're not the actual wheat or corn or soybean producers, but they're the middlemen, and they buy, I believe they're involved in the exchange of wheats and the futures trades of these commodities. They try to negotiate deals with countries so that more countries will take our wheat, corn, and soybeans that genetically modified. We did a deal with Mexico so that they have to take our genetically engineered wheat and corn. And this is done at the behest of the government and the bureaucracies and the corporations forcing genetically modified crops on these other countries that want to have trade deals with us. I don't think we've ever done that with Europe, basically said we're not going to trade with you unless you take our genetically modified crops. But I find that really troubling that happens all the time. But as far as like the alphabet soup of government agencies, I mentioned the FDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Health. I was really troubling to find out that the American Heart Society, I hope I get this right, forgive me if it's not completely accurate, but they are the major subsidizer of the of all the information related to our food guide pyramid. So the U.S. Department of Health, U.S. Which agency is that? U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Health, USDA. They're the ones who are in charge of deciding our food guide pyramid and what is healthy food. That has been completely been bought off by General Mills because they don't want people to be afraid of eating too much grains. They want the grains to be number one, even though any nutritionist, if you're training for any kind of athletic competition, is going to say stay away from eating way too many carbs and way too many starches. And every nutritionist knows that. But because the Department of Health and the Heart Society is brought to you by General Mills, Cheerios, and Lucky Charms and cornflakes, they're never going to say that. And so it's just like you can't trust this alphabet soup of agencies. And I'm not going to get into anything related to the pharmaceutical companies because I know now from experience that YouTube doesn't like you to talk about pharmaceutical companies. And we talked about that on a previous episode. If you want to go back and watch that, it was basically just related to the money that the folks at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, were getting as sponsorships from outlets like Pfizer. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I suggest you listen to Rand Paul talk about that. He's a doctor. He's a senator from Kentucky. And he's grilled Fauci on these different mandates that were in place, and he's tried to get information from Fauci, asking how much money are you getting from Pfizer. But I don't think agency that's in charge of all of the health and public health of the United States that's getting tons and tons of money from a drug company is necessarily the most unbiased when it comes to what pharmaceuticals we should be taking. So take a look at that. Again, I wanted to get into the Defense Department as well. If you are familiar with what happened after 9/11, take a look at what happened when Donald Rumsfeld was actually initiated into the office of Defense Secretary, and he actually was the Defense Secretary under Richard Nixon 20 years prior to being the Defense Secretary under George H.W. Bush. And during that 20-year period where he was not Defense Secretary, he was actually in corporate America. And he was working for pharmaceutical companies. He turned around a beleaguered pharmaceutical company. And Rumsfeld was picked. Why was he picked? I don't know. But something really interesting happened. I think they picked Rumsfeld because they thought he would be super pro-war, super pro build up the military industrial complex. Let's support Lockheed Martin. Let's support Halliburton. But actually just the opposite happened. I found that so interesting looking into him. He actually was calling for scaling down of the military. He was saying we needed to be far more strategic with our dollars, with our weaponry, with our defense. Let's actually think about spending less on defense. And I don't think anybody expected that. And then what happened? 9/11. And then we were introduced to this giant threat of terrorism. And obviously it was a terrible thing that happened, and we had to react in some manner. But really, Donald Rumsfeld's initiatives completely were sidelined. And of course, our military industrial complex got a giant boost. And Dick Cheney, who formerly worked for Halliburton, that was a defense contractor, set the stage for more and more spending on military and defense, and us getting into foreign wars. And the Iraqi conflict, the Afghanistan conflict lasted for the next 20 years after that. And right when we got Afghanistan, of course, we had Ukraine happen. So I suggest that college graduates, you've learned a lot. You've basically probably learned history and English, psychology, diversity, but I suggest you learn about how to gather facts and good information online so that you are not somebody's pawn. Because what I find is that the media is not often reporting the entire truth. They report selective truth, and they very often want people to just believe whatever it is they are trying to push. And you see that with almost every major network in the United States. And I feel like the media's job is to find and disseminate truth. and to find facts. And when they make a mistake factually, to go back and check that. We have a couple of factual errors in this issue that we had to go back and retract. Admit when you do something that's not correct. Go back to your readers and understand that your readers or viewers are your greatest assets, not your advertisers. And to develop that relationship with them is the most important thing you can do as a media organization. And so that's kind of how I learned from how to do my job from the journalism department at the University of Utah. I only took a couple of journalism classes, but I worked at the Daily Chronicle when I was there. And then I luckily started Utah Stories when I was just getting tired of sitting in front of a computer all day. And it's awesome that we're now going to be celebrating our 17th year anniversary of Utah Stories magazine. This is our current issue right now about the rise of craft brewing. We have this team of amazing writers with us right now. I'm so proud of them. We have a guy up in Helper named Del Jones. We have a writer in Ogden, and her name is Rachel Fixon. We have all these new writers who are wanting to come and help us out. Holly Lammert, Dan Potts writes about all things related to the outdoors and hunting and wildlife. And I just feel incredibly fortunate to have such great people surrounding me. Al Sakharov, he wrote for newspapers in Pittsburgh for years and years and then wrote a bunch of books. He came in my office one day and said, "Hey, I want to help you run this magazine. What can I do to help?" And he became one of our best editors. And so I feel really proud. We're about to enter into our 17th year of Utah Stories, and we're going really strong. And I want to thank you so much for watching. We're going to be beginning with Rocky Anderson in just a few minutes here. So we'll take a short break, and if you want to subscribe to Utah Stories magazine, go out to our website, go to utahstories.com, hit the subscribe button, and it is $3 per month, and we will send it right to your mailbox every single month. And we'll take a little break, and when we come back, it'll be Rocky Anderson. Welcome to Utah Stories. So today on the program, I want to talk about homelessness. We've got 4 guests, and this is going to be one of the most impactful programs we've ever done. And I really think that this is an episode everybody needs to watch. So if you'll share this program with your friends, leave a comment, like it, that would really help us out, because there's just not enough people who know what is going on in downtown Salt Lake City, and it is critical that people be informed. I don't normally endorse any political candidates. I don't say I'm a Republican or Democrat. I try to just find the truth and report on the truth. But I think it is absolutely critical that people know what is happening in downtown Salt Lake City. And I think there's one word that says it all, and that word is abatement. Thanks for coming on, Rocky.
It's good to be here. Thanks very much, and thank you for helping expose what has been in full view of so many people for months, but completely either not reported at all or underreported. I don't know why our television stations haven't been out during these freezing days when hundreds of people have been left out without any shelter, no alternative for them, when they're being pushed from one place to another by the police, having their property confiscated and destroyed by our police. I haven't been able to find anybody, including the ACLU, to file what is the obvious lawsuit that ought to be filed. But it just seems like the city And our media, with some great exceptions like yourself, have been totally asleep. I think really negligent. And there are ramifications to this. The ramifications are a continuing policy of keeping people out, and through this brutally, brutally cold winter we just went through, so many people dying, so many people losing their fingers and toes to frostbite, and just the human misery, and all of it being a direct result of indifference or even calculated policy by our mayor and by the city council.
Yeah, and I look at that word abatement, and I've thought a lot about how you put it. I mean, and it's like that is the verb we use to eradicate mosquitoes.
That's why I don't use the word abatement. I use police raids and confiscation and destruction of property. Yeah.
That's a more accurate description. But I think the telling thing is that the county and the city and the police, they all use that word.
Which is
you can't understand how a word that is synonymous with extermination and that we got it on our property taxes, mosquito abatement, that means eradication. To apply that word to homeless people who are, a lot of them, temporarily homeless, they're down on their luck, they just found out they're evicted, they lost their job, and they're all being shuffled in together. I mean, this is what I've discovered in interviewing them. They're all being put at the same level and status. And the problem is some of them have been out on the streets for years and they're hardened drug addicts and criminals. And some of them just lost their job in their housing and they can't get in the shelters. They can't get into rapid rehousing. And it's like, doesn't matter what your status is, doesn't matter where you came from. We're going to pick up all your crap. We're going to put it in a front end loader and put it in a dumpster. And you're going to not have anything if you happen to leave your tent at the wrong time.
And when you say crap, some of it is
personal belongings that are very important.
And they're tents that good-hearted people have contributed to help members of the homeless community out.
Yeah.
And then they come along and talk about irresponsible just environmental practices, let alone the utter inhumanity of this. Where is the reuse and recycle in taking somebody's brand new tent with heavy equipment and crushing it and dumping it in a truck with all their belongings headed for the landfill?
Well, and it's the police treat it as crap. But if you're a homeless person, those are all your personal belongings. That's everything you own. That's your survival gear. I got really, I should say, I started doing my deep dive into this when I started interviewing people on the Jordan River almost a year ago, and they talked about the abatement policy. And what I learned was the hand sanitizer is their heating method. That's what they actually use in a little sterno stove or just a metal cup to stay warm all night. And the police were dumping gallons of the hand sanitizer they were using to stay warm. And they wouldn't even let them keep that. They said, if you let us keep one thing, let us keep our hand sanitizer. And she said, this woman, Jamie Draper, said they would not even let us keep our hand sanitizer to stay warm. And I just think that is just purely diabolical evil. I mean,
it is.
Because you're putting people's lives in
And
risk.
I've taken gallons of sanitizer down to people in the homeless community. And that's where they get it, is from people who are contributing these things.
Yeah, they're down. They're
and
saying,
a lot
what do you need? Oh, we don't need socks. We don't need blankets. We need hand sanitizer. Yeah. They all say that. We need that to stay warm.
It is survival gear. And along come our police. And I have a hard time blaming any of those individual police officers because it's a matter of leadership. I asked one police officer at the last raid I went to down on 5th West. Walked up to him, it was a freezing day, and I said, I've talked to these people. The shelters are all full. I checked last night. They're all at 100% capacity. There is no shelter available. I don't know of any alternative place. I've asked them all, do they know of any alternative place? No, I said, officer, do you know? Have you told any of them of any alternative? He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders, and he said, you're going to have to ask Mayor Mendenhall. That's where the orders are coming from. She's directly responsible, not only for the lack of shelter and the misery and the deaths that have come about because of these people not having any other option. That's not their fault. Mm-hmm. Every community has responsibility to take care of those in their homeless population, at least to give them shelter. Well, that is a basic international human right, like it's a basic human international right to have access to a toilet, which she has denied in most instances. And I think
that the way they look at this is they see the blight. Of course, there's blight around a homeless camp, and there's garbage, and there's human feces, and they're saying, oh, we need to clean it up. Okay, you need to clean it up. They need to be somewhere else. But they don't want to sit and think for 1 second about where they're going to go. They don't want to sit and think, oh, well, we definitely need, along with the cleanup crew, a pre-cleanup crew who's going to make arrangements for every one of those people to find a shelter so they don't die.
Absolutely.
And to think that you're spending $300 million on the homeless, most of it's going towards permanent supportive housing, of course, but that you're not thinking the one step ahead, that these people need to find another place to go to. And as a result, 17 people, homeless people, die over the winter. And it's not a story the media is interested in covering.
Isn't that amazing that the media hasn't been down getting footage of tents being destroyed, police running people off, people freezing out in the cold, and no alternative provided to them. Now, if you're upset, and I am, that there are encampments in our parks, there shouldn't be encampments in our parks. Mm-hmm. Parks should be there for the public use. But if anybody's upset about that, don't blame people who haven't been provided any alternatives. Blame our elected officials. You know, there was an Ask Me Anything, but it wasn't really me when she was doing it, but it was the mayor saying, ask me anything on social media. So somebody asked, how much was spent on police overtime during these raids on homeless encampments? $2.2 million. Now think where that money could have gone. You could have had a sanctioned encampment. You could have had bathrooms, showers. You could have had food, and this community would have contributed a lot of that. There could have been volunteers.
There's empty warehouses in downtown Salt Lake City that I know about, like hundreds of square feet, empty warehouses.
Yep.
And to think that, oh no, we have nowhere to put them. We can't. Our shelters are full.
Open up your public buildings. Why not
the
open
public safety building, the old public safety building?
Well, how about the rec center downtown, the county rec center? They condescended to open that 1 or 2 nights. I went down and volunteered one night. And then the only other time they opened it up was to provide a nice dinner during the NBA All-Star game to get them off the streets so the world would not see the results of the utter failures of leadership in this city.
Yeah, that was a really telling event. I went and interviewed people before that. And so you were mayor when the Olympics came to Salt Lake City.
Yes.
Obviously, Salt Lake City was quite a lot smaller then, but there was a homeless population back then.
And we anticipated a much larger homeless population, and we did something about it. The Los Angeles Times did a great story about our Olympian effort to take care of homeless people in our community. We provided a 450-bed overflow shelter at the old Serta mattress factory. We were really proud of that. And when I was asked, what are you going to do? I said, there will be no raids. I was quoted in the LA Times saying there will be no raids. We respect and honor the civil and human rights of those who are homeless in our community. And we expected more homeless in part because landlords were evicting people so they could charge these outrageous rates during the Olympics. Our eviction laws are in large part to blame for a lot of people being homeless. And I think our legislature needs to get a grip on that. But can I show you what I videotaped during these so-called abatements, these raids? Mm-hmm. And the first video, this video is all video that I shot while I was there. Mm-hmm.
Can you pull that up, Troy?
Yeah, Troy, if you could show, there are a couple of clips I've given you on the destruction of property during these raids. This is down, they call it Spaghetti Bowl, under the freeway, not close to any businesses or residents. They weren't bothering anybody.
Members of the homeless
so watch this.
Out of their camps where they're doing zero harm. With no neighbors around. Places are kept clean. I've been all around these. Look at this.
Brand new tent.
Look at this. Brand new tent.
Look at that.
That was donated by a nonprofit.
Yep, and look at the smile on his face when he turns around. Watch this.
That is disgusting.
See the smile on his face? That's me narrating it, by the way, talking about how disgraceful this is. This is the way we treat those who are most in need in our community in Salt Lake City with the kind of elected leadership we have now.
And how much notice do you know do you know how much notice they got before this raid happened?
There was a notice posted and it had one. Yeah, there I know that these are tents that people contributed.
And this is the city and the county's response.
There's a guy's pair of pants, pair of work pants. You can see.
Yeah, look at that. So you asked about notice. There was a notice that was up that had the wrong date on it. It was a date that had already gone by. And then
people that are here today are going to have to go somewhere. They're going to go to the streets of Salt Lake City, and they're going to have to find somewhere else. And my understanding is this is a blatant 8th Amendment violation. Because if you don't have
I'm so glad you're doing this. That there's somebody besides me and a couple others.
Where are the television cameras?
Yeah, it's like.
Where are the newspaper reporters? Our media has absolutely blown it when it came to what I think is probably the biggest ongoing story in this city this last winter. So,
and talking about the media, I mean, I've been reporting on the lack of a homeless death count, an accurate death count. And I had Eric Peterson from the Utah Investigative Journalism Project.
Does a great job.
About 9 months ago. And I said, we should be able to grandma request this data and get it. That was 9 months ago. Neither he nor I were able to get this data. The Tribune got some of this data because I guess they just decided they won't talk to independent reporters anymore at this police department, grandma office. The Tribune finally did a story, and kudos to them for doing the story, that far more than 5 people died who were on the streets. They had reported that the Salt Lake Police Department only said 5 at that time when 5 died all at once, and then they just went silent. And the count was somewhere about like 10 or 11. But Ty Bellamy is going to come on later on today, was in contact with the coroner, who actually takes these John Does and Jane Does, who they do no investigation to find out who they are. And these bodies were piling up. There's 17 by her count. And I think it's just, and then they never actually linked the homeless deaths back to the administrators who were enacting the policies that were causing the deaths. These abatements cause death. Yeah. When all your survival gear is gone, you have no way to stay warm. The shelters are full. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, and I think trying to pin a number on it, you have to see what the cause of death is from the medical examiner. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what the numbers are, but 1 is way too many. And there were 5 before Mayor Mendenhall. You remember that big public thing? She's so great at the performative stuff. She did a press conference. I signed an emergency declaration. She's really good about signing documents as if she's actually getting anything done. And she said, this is after 5 people were known to have died from being out in the cold. And she said, she says so sincerely that people in our community deserve to have shelter and warmth during the winter. Well, she was the person responsible for them being out in the freezing cold. And so she said, I signed these emergency declarations allowing these 2 shelters in Salt Lake City, she calls them resource centers, to expand the beds by 25 each. Well, I checked weeks later. Apparently, she never talked to them to see if they could ramp it up to 25 more beds. Mm-hmm. And weeks later, between the 2 of those resource centers, they were 55 beds short of what they were authorized to be. So her emergency declaration, at least as of several weeks later, after all this freezing, constantly freezing weather, it had absolutely no effect. It was so misleading. It was such a phony act. And in fact, Wayne Niederhauser, who is the homeless coordinator for the state, even commented the same day she signed that, saying, well, it's going to be some time before they can get staffing up to do what she's saying. And she never checked with them to see if they were capable of taking on those extra people.
I mean, it's like the administration responds to the media. That's kind of how it works in a mayoral office, right? If the media is reporting on something and there's a spotlight on it, then they're going to respond. But it's like there's never been a spotlight on the homeless catastrophe. No. There's never been a real spotlight on, with a story with legs where they do continual reporting of what's going on. And those homeless resource centers, as we reported on, they were designed to maybe flex up. Like they said, we're going to have maybe a 55 bed increase. And I talked to the people who know those homeless resource centers and who work right next to them. They say that they're already a disaster because there's so much drug trafficking going on at night around them. There's a guy who has a business creating munitions right next to the Gerald E. King, it's the Gail Miller show.
It's Gail Miller, yeah.
And he was watching this out his front window every single day, where drug trafficking is going on all the time, and that the population would come out and be victimized, the ones going to work. He watched a man who was trying to go to work every day, and he would be mugged and robbed, and there was no security. And how come that aspect isn't being more closely examined? Because
and the media should be out there. Did the city and did the folks who push for these scattered resource centers, which are total disaster. They were a disaster from the get-go, because combined, after they closed down the road home shelter downtown, combined they had about 400 fewer beds than were in the road home. Mm-hmm. So they calculated disaster.
Yeah, they thought this
that whole resource center, scattered resource center approach. And I think what happened is that there were initial plans for 2 larger resource centers that would be bed-for-bed equivalents to what they had before. And it was when Aaron Mendenhall was on the city council, and they put the kibosh on that plan and chose a political response instead, and that is, let's spread them around so each neighborhood takes on a little bit, so that we can have equity. Equity it's amazing that these people can even utter that word, given what the tragedy
equity in terms
that they've
of
got.
What?
That you're putting these all around the city.
Oh, so that it's dispersed.
Scattering them and putting a limit on the number of people in those shelters. And by the way, that guy that you were talking about near the Gail
Miller? His name's
Miller?
Bob. I'm trying to think of his last name. He and his brother run this munitions.
Exactly. And he's spent over $60,000 out of his own pocket because of broken windows, malicious damage caused by people there. And these neighborhoods were all promised, you're going to have security. You're not going to suffer any of these problems. Well, people complain of NIMBYism. Who isn't going to be a NIMBY person when somebody suggests they put a resource center in your neighborhood when they've had such a horrible record in undermining these neighborhoods? I want to show you one other thing. Troy, if you can bring up the, let's go to the one on 5th West, the tent destroyed. Yeah, it's a video. And so that earlier one was down under the freeway called Spaghetti Bowl. This is on 5th West, west of the Rio Grande.
Oh, yeah.
Look at this.
Are they taking a tent here?
These are contractors with the city.
Wait, why are you taking the tent? No, it's not abandoned. It's not abandoned. You don't need to do this. Look, this is somebody's personal property. What you guys are doing is theft. It's a due process violation. What the hell are you doing? That is shameful. Just as human beings, that's indecent.
And it's got all their personal property inside the town.
Yeah, all their stuff is falling
Mickey,
out.
what
Now,
are
can
they
you
doing?
imagine if you and I went down and we took somebody's, all of their belongings?
Clearly just told
You
them
know, and
that
it's
it's not
interesting
abandoned. They're destroying it and ignoring us
that
as they do it. And
Okay.
calling it
there's
That's
one guy, I
disgraceful.
still haven't met
Just-
him, but
just as
he'll go to
human
these
beings,
raids.
How do you guys reconcile taking somebody's tent in the freezing weather and there is no alternative place for them to go? That is disgusting.
This is what our mayor
Okay.
has
It's
put
interesting.
into
The police aren't at this one, so the police
They
basically
are.
want
They
to
are.
have their.
No,
They were
the
there.
The police were there, and this
They
happened.
get mad when you film them.
This happened. No, actually, one walked by there in the video. But I had earlier spoken with a police officer down there. I said, please don't do this to these people. They have no alternative. There's no shelter available. I check every night. You haven't given them an alternative. And he said, I can assure you we're not going to be taking anybody's tent today. This was 5 minutes later. And these are folks.
Did he
from-
not know?
The folks that were doing this were from Advantage Services, which is contracted by Salt Lake City. This, again, is at the behest of the mayor. Go down, clear out these areas, take their property, and move them on to somewhere else. And as Captain Diamond was quoted in the newspaper as saying, he's with Salt Lake City Police Department, when we run them off of one area where they're encamped, we know that they have no alternative. And we also know that when they move somewhere else, we're probably going to be told to go clear them out of there too. That is the definition of utter inhumanity, callousness. And again, this happened for months. It happened throughout the entire winter. You could see how cold it was
Yes.
down there that day. And not one person from the media was there. Once in a while, there's a KSL.com reporter, and I wish I knew her name right now because I want to give her credit. She's the only one who was captured at all
Well, you
for
know
the
what?
public what's going on.
I've been trying to get to the bottom of this Advantage Services, and do you know what they do? That is a homeless resource for jobs.
Yeah.
So they take people who are homeless and say, "Hey, you want a job? How about you clean up homeless camps for us?"
Yeah.
And so the one of the main jobs they have to offer homeless people is destroying tents and picking up all of their things and throwing them away. I mean, it's like,
What does that do to a person's soul?
yeah,
Really?
it's just like it makes you feel like, well, the whole world is against me if you're a homeless person, and that's the only job that you can get is day labor and get $50, and
Yeah.
it's just terrible.
So I mentioned earlier that as they're running people off from one place to another, there's so much trauma, so much agony people go through. And even if they don't have their property destroyed, to be treated that way. I mean, imagine their view of police officers when that's their only interaction. And police never are down there to help them. Mm-hmm. They're down there to run them off because that's their orders. And Troy, if you could pull up the video of and it's a series of people that I interviewed during one of these raids. Where are you going to go? Do you have an alternative? What, as they're running you off of these places, what's going to happen? And keep in mind, when you have a problem, as we all should have, when there are encampments all around our city and our parks, on parking strips, it's not their fault because they have no alternative. It's the fault of our elected officials, and ultimately, it's the fault of our city mayor. Listen to this.
Okay, let's talk about alternatives. Where are people going to go today?
They're gonna hit the streets of Salt Lake.
Let
They're
me
gonna
ask,
hit the streets
has
of Salt
there
Lake.
been one outreach worker from the city or the county come out here and talk to you about potential programs or housing?
No,
Have you ever had that happen since you've been on the street?
no.
Let me ask you, as you stand here right now, has anybody provided you any alternative for where you can go right now?
Absolutely not.
Has anybody come to you about any programming that you can get into?
Absolutely not.
Do you have any substance abuse issues?
No.
Do you have any mental health problems?
Yes.
And you don't have to say if you don't want.
Yes, I do.
Okay,
I have
so-
mental and physical disability.
And has
I have
anybody
both of them.
offered you any mental health services?
No,
No?
no, no.
So you've been given no services,
Yeah, and I've got
no outreach
a
workers.
grocery list of mental illnesses, and I'm really trying to hold it together out here.
Did they provide you with any notice of anywhere else you can go?
They just said it overflows, but they're awful.
Every overflow
I
is
met her
full.
before,
I've
Johnny.
confirmed that. There are no beds.
No beds.
Have they told you
We-
anywhere you can go during the day or
Nope.
night?
Nope,
No alternative.
no alternative.
All
Just get your shit and go.
From the city or the county, has anybody come to give you any help? All right, has anyone from the city, from the county, anybody come by to tell you where you can go?
They have not.
No alternative.
No.
And-
They don't tell us where we can go. They haven't done nothing for us. You know, that's why we go and camp everywhere. You know what I mean? We have nowhere else to go.
There is no alternative place, and yet they're running you off of here and they haven't told you where else you can go?
They have not provided an alternative
Do you
for
know-
predicaments.
Do you know where you're going to sleep tonight?
I have no idea.
But it'll be somewhere else in Salt Lake City?
Most likely.
Okay, let's talk about
Yeah, that's terrible. Yeah, and I wonder how it is that on the mayor's watch, she can say, yeah, allocate another $2 million to police overtime using the point-in-time count money. That's the money that's supposed to go to housing from the federal government. And she can say, yeah, let's do more police overtime. Let's get more munitions and armored vehicles and things like that. But not think, no, we need to fund caseworkers to tell people before they're evicted where they can go. How come that is not an agenda item or even a thought that crosses their mind?
I don't know. And why isn't our city council rising up, speaking out on this? I've had council members, one council member, I said, why are you putting up with this? Why are you speaking out? Said, I didn't want to get in trouble with the mayor. I want to be effective. And so there's a sense of intimidation that they don't want to cross the mayor. How dangerous is that when we were supposed to have this co-equal independent branch of government, the city council, and they just line up like the worst kind of sycophants and watch this go on in our community?
Well, I've
and
tried to
not
talk
speak
to
out.
anybody in the council and the administration, and it's like there's a bubble around her. And I tried to find out who she took to Miami Beach, Florida, in the middle of last winter to study homelessness on the beaches of Florida. And it was a big group of people. And she spent public money to go examine homelessness in a really wonderful sunny climate. And I noticed, I look at her Facebook post, like let me see what you posted on Facebook. Like, what were you learning down there? There's nothing posted. And I know all these people went with her, and we're trying to find out from Grandma Requests, okay, how much was spent, who all went with you, and what did you learn? I mean, she says she learned about psychological issues and disorders, but look at our neighbor just to the east, Denver. They allow sanctioned campgrounds. They allow safety fences around these camps. It's a much bigger problem there in terms of overall numbers than it is here, but they're not completely disregarding that people are going to die if you keep doing that policy.
That's right. She hasn't gone to one exemplary homeless project or program in this country in the, how many years? 9 years, over 9 years that she's been in elective public office. And part of
she's
that
never
time,
been to Denver. She's never been to San Antonio.
No,
that San
to
Antonio
Haven
sounds
for Hope.
amazing.
It is. Haven
It
for
sounds like
Hope's
that should be
incredible.
our model.
That's exactly what we should do. It should be one campus, provide mental health treatment, provide addiction treatment, have people there in transition housing, and at the same time have a place, there they call it the courtyard, where you have the low or no barrier people come in, so they're not camping all over the city and parks and on park strips and all the rest. They come in because they have a safe place. They're not going to be raided by the police. They're not going to have their things stolen. They have property lockers. They have food.
They have vocational
provided to them.
programs as well. Like I hear a lot of people, homeless people say, if they could just job train me on a vocation, that would be ideal. They have that at Haven for Hope, right?
They do, but I'm talking about the very
the
barrier
the
folks,
lowest.
the folks that are having drug problems, and you just need to get them in and then provide that kind of outreach service. The kind of outreach service we just heard from person after person, nobody has gone to them. I dealt with people on the streets in front of my law office, a lot of homeless people. One guy, it took me 1.5 years, but I got him into an apartment. I was his outreach worker, in effect. I wrote to the mayor. I said, you need to provide we're never going to solve this problem if you don't provide outreach and case management. And we also need public bathrooms because we have human feces and urine all over the place downtown. She was so uncaring, so unresponsive. It was disgraceful. The best she gave me was that the same city contractor, they could call them and come clean it up after the fact. No regard for individual dignity, no regard for hygiene, or for the quality of life for the rest of us.
I think that a lot of viewers and people who watch what we do, and maybe they have the same opinion with what you're suggesting, is that we're promoting public camps. That is not the idea, right? The idea is we need a big intake facility that can take care of the psychological disorders separate from the people who are addicts, or if they have both, they go to a special place. And to take care of the people who have just recently been homeless, who just need to keep their stuff secure so they can get off the streets.
Absolutely, and the people that are working.
What do you see is preventing that facility from being built and the public will to have something like that?
We were on the way toward doing that. I mean, we basically had a campus when the Road Home Shelter was downtown. That needed to be improved upon.
Needed to be gutted.
No question
it was
about
terrible.
It had to be fixed. But instead of fixing it, they destroyed it, and then they went with this model where there's no evidence to support it. There's not an exemplary system that just spreads out shelters, they call them resource centers. Very few people are transitioning out of these shelters in Salt Lake City. Can I show you? Because this is what Salt Lake City's media has completely failed to convey to the people of our city. Mm-hmm. I went down, freezing day. I could barely hold my phone to videotape and to make a record of what the media was failing to cover. And I came across this man, and he was in his stocking feet. I said, why don't you have shoes or boots on? And he said, I can't wear them. I said, let me see your feet. I saw one of his feet. I said, get in my car right now. I'm taking you to the emergency room. I took him up Salt Lake Regional Hospital, emergency room. They were wonderful. It should have been done months earlier. He had been going, Troy, can you pull up the still photos of this gentleman's feet? These are photos that I took. He had massive frostbite. Did he split?
No.
Oh, there he is.
Yeah,
these are this man's
just awful,
feet
man.
who were down in the freezing cold on 5th West in our own city, frostbite and trench foot. He'd been suffering from.
And trench foot is like a disease you get if you're fighting in World War I in the trenches and your feet just start to melt, basically.
Well, yeah, and it's mostly from all the moisture and everything.
But it's awful, man.
Yeah, your feet begin to basically rot. But he had trench foot and frostbite.
And he wasn't trying to get help on his own because he was mentally ill. Is that correct? Or
he was a really good guy, but I think there probably was a mental illness component to it. And part of it is a lot of people just don't know where to go. When you're treated in a city like they're treated with such total, I mean, where were the police? They saw that he didn't have stockings on. They're supposed to serve and protect everybody. Mm-hmm. And yet they just disregard him. And where was our, really, I think if the public didn't know about this, there's one institution that's responsible, and that is the media. Because if we're not there to observe something firsthand, or if we don't have a really good person calling us or writing to us to tell us what they're saying, we rely on the whole on the media to know what is happening in our communities, in our government, whether it's locally, statewide, worldwide.
Well, the whole institution of media, since I was in journalism school, is really kind of falling apart. It's like the influencers are getting more eyeballs than the media.
Yeah, well, that's true, but we still do have newspapers. We still have evening news. We've still got people with cameras. Why weren't they down there chronicling this and raising the awareness of the people of the city? Because we have a history in this city of showing a lot of compassion toward members of the homeless community. Now when we see this vastly different approach, these policies of leaving hundreds of people out in the freezing weather with such tragic consequences, that's a huge shift. And the people of our community, I think, would want to know that and hold people accountable. And I got to tell you, Richard, this, in addition to the impacts on businesses, on the impacts on residents because of all this, because the solutions are the same that would meet the interests of the homeless community, residents and businesses. But it's because of the total lack of leadership that I decided to run for mayor.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you are, because it's like, who else is addressing it? But I think that also, as I've been reporting on this, and I've been trying to grandma request data about unattended deaths and then figure out where these deaths were, because so many homeless people were telling me there's a serial killer. I don't think that's the case. I think what's actually happening is the fentanyl is crossing our borders at an incredible pace, and anybody who's never taken fentanyl is going to just die, and that's really what's happening. But what I see that's just totally missing is the data and transparency from our police department.
Yeah, and I can tell you, when I'm mayor, we will provide that information without putting everybody through the grandma process. There's no reason why this it should be public information. The public should know.
Eric said on the show, if there were one data point that everybody who's in the homeless administrative community would want to keep tabs on, is the death rate for different various reasons. Right. Obviously, some are going to die from natural causes. Some are going to die from overdose. Some are going to die from stabbings or injuries or wounds. But that should be a critical key data point that everybody's keeping tabs on to know if they're doing a good job or not.
Yeah, have you seen in our newspaper profiles of the homeless people that have died during this last winter due to exposure? No.
You never see their pictures.
They do it for people who die in our jails.
But we're about to get that on this program today. I'm really excited. I think this takes an incredible amount of courage that the parents of a young lady who froze to death last winter, wasn't reported on by the media, I don't even know that they reported her name officially in the record. They're coming on the program today to talk about the death of their daughter, and I give big kudos to the parents of Candace. That's going to be coming up in just a few minutes here. If you want to stick around, we moved to this bigger space so that we could accommodate everybody. But I think more people need to be aware what's actually happening, and that our brothers, our sisters, our daughters, our sons, our friends, they are the homeless community. I think sometimes people look at them like, oh, those are people from other states, or they just it's their own fault they're homeless.
When we turn human beings into abstractions like we do so often with inmates and now members of the homeless community, it's amazing the capacity people have to just turn a blind eye and not care, just shut them out. Mm-hmm. And we've got to get beyond that. And our humanity, how do we define ourselves as a community if we can just look the other way? But if we're not aware of it, and the media isn't doing their job, then you can't really blame members of the public if they're unaware. But once they're made aware, we all need to stand up and say no more. And the people that brought these conditions about and that have ignored the needs and failed to do the job that cities around the world do for members of the homeless community, they need to be held fully accountable.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for anybody, any loved ones of people who have died under these circumstances, because it is absolutely unnecessary. And the people that led to these consequences are not being held accountable by the community, and they're not taking responsibility. And we all need to be aware that this is happening. And I just can't imagine having somebody close to me going through that and being treated less than as a number, just as if she didn't even exist.
Yeah. What time do we have, Troy?
It is 6:30.
Okay. Yeah, well, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we're going to have the parents of Candace on, and it looks like probably Ty Bellamy, who's the person who's been keeping track of homeless deaths. Luckily, somebody's doing that. And she's going to talk about how she came on the program last time to talk about Candace. She knew her personally. She knew what she was going through, and actually discovered her after she died. So we're going to come right back and stick with us. Welcome to Utah Stories. So tonight we've got a very important special story to share with you. It's the story that no other media is adequately covering and that the police are not investigating properly. It's what we think is like a black hole in news media and coverage, and we just had on Rocky Anderson to talk about it. It's the death of our homeless brothers and sisters and friends and daughters, and it's just not being covered and it's not being investigated. And we think it's very important that people know that this is happening. And I'm really grateful to have on the program today Barry, Vicky, and Tammy, Brenda, sorry, and your last names are
Egolf and
Dennis.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having the courage to come on to talk about your daughter who died in February 1st last winter, and this death was not part of the even inclusion of the deaths that the Salt Lake City Police Department was reporting on, nor that the media were reporting on. I found out about it from Ty, who's sitting next to me. Ty was able to keep track of the homeless death count when the police weren't, and we had her on the program a couple of months ago. You found out that we were actively covering this story. And thank you so much, guys, for coming on. I really appreciate it, your courage.
Remember your mics. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so tell me about Candace. I want to show this picture. Just start the show. This was Candace when she was a little girl. This was her a little bit older. This was her a little bit older. And she had 2 children. This is her with her 2 kids. And the thing that I don't see in the media are the pictures, the names, the photos, the backgrounds. So I'm so glad you were willing to share that with us, because the homeless community is not being humanized, they're being dehumanized. So tell us, if you would, Vicky, what was Candace like as a little girl, and how did she, what were the most defining characteristics of her?
I'm going to say she was just a happy girl, loved her family, loved her brother, dad and mom. She loved Barbies, and she loves dolls when she was a little baby. She was born in Scotland, and so we had her over there, and really good baby. I didn't have any problems with her. She kind of liked to laugh a lot, play. I don't know. What do you think, Barry? No pressure, Dad.
You pretty much covered everything, but we raise our children to know right from wrong. We're basically hard-working, blue-collar workers.
Can you grab Ty's mic? Sorry, I can't. I'm
Is this?
Yeah, we're having an issue.
Oh, it's not working.
Anyway, we did our best to raise our family. We all, both parents worked her whole life. We, like you said, we taught them right from wrong to try to live a productive life. And somehow Candace, as she got older, went down a road of having a drug addiction. I'm very upset because I couldn't find the correct resources in Salt Lake City. We've tried over the last few years before this took place, trying a couple of different resources that are local, but I think they were very disorganized, no structure. They have some of the kids running the program. So my daughter lasted about an hour. She was at one of the local facilities where we talked her into going in and getting help. And they had 5 or 6 girls to a small room in bunk beds. And when she got in there, they immediately accused her of doing drugs. Well, that's why she's there, to get help. So it ended up, they asked me to come pick her up. So I went down and picked her up, and that's where I seen how disorganized the mess was. And I said, well, I'll be happy to take my daughter out of here. So I just don't think there's resources available. My daughter has...
Those were the public resources, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I like I said, our daughter, we both tried to help her. She lived with us for years on and off, trying to get her on track. She'd get a good job, but then she slipped back into doing drugs. Like she'd disappear for a couple of days or something, and then she ended up losing her job again. And so anyway, it's just disappointing. As much as we tried to get her help, we couldn't find it. We could have like depleted our retirement. I could have there's one outfit that wanted like $40,000 or something to get her in the program, and then some ungodly monthly payment, which we couldn't afford it. But I mean, I'd have been willing to someplace local that could have helped her. I think there's so many ways she could have been helped and saved her life, and it's too late now, and I'm very upset about it. I think.
Did you know she was on the streets when she was?
You know, I didn't want to believe it because she's very lovable and likable, and she talks very well. She can, most of the time she would stay with somebody. She'd have somebody. And I wanted to believe that she was actually met somebody and they were at least staying somewhere or something, you know. I didn't really realize that she was on the street or want to believe it until I didn't even know where she was when this went down, when Ty, I mean, the only reason we got more information was from Ty here. She spent time with Candace on her last maybe, I don't know how long, at least 7-10 days of her life when she was living in a tent downtown. So this was shocking to me. Didn't want to believe it.
So she was on and off drugs for quite a few years.
Yeah, trying to get help.
She was trying to get back on her feet. She was. So you said, Vicki, that she disappeared for a while, and you were trying to figure out where she was exactly.
Yeah, so she'd disappear. Like I said, she would go a little crazy from working and stuff, and mentally I think it kind of affected her that she couldn't see her kids as much. You know, she had a son and a daughter, and she knew that, and so I think that really hurt her. But, you know, I kept telling her they're there for you, stuff like that. But she would just say, I just don't know what else to do. I'm trying everything, and it just doesn't seem to work.
Was she able to get clean on her own for periods of time?
For periods of time, very little periods of time. But then it would just, she'd meet the wrong person. She'd hang with the wrong people.
Do you think she was self-medicating? Was there psychological
yeah,
disorder there
self-medicating.
too?
You know, I couldn't imagine losing a husband. I couldn't imagine. We've lost a lot. We've lost a father, brother-in-law, daughter, grandpa, grandma.
So sorry.
And so she'd try for a while. She'd be happy. And she'd try to pick herself back up and just go right back into it again. So
I'm sorry to hear that.
We'd try, and she'd say, I can't. So
when you say you lost all these people, is it mostly to drugs? Or is it?
Cancer was one. My brother-in-law, 40 years old. And Grandma was 99. We lost her. She tried to take Candace and tell her stuff, but Candace said, well, I'm here. I'm on my own. I'm a free spirit, and just got to figure it out. That's what she'd tell us. And we'd try to get her to come home, and she'd say, I just got to figure it out. So did you think that there was going to be public care for her? I did.
Did you think there would be caseworkers who would eventually convince her to get off the streets and reform her life?
I did, but it never happened for her. She tried to call people and try to get a room or a bed, and they'd say, I don't have one, or can't help you with that.
Yeah.
You know, or I'd try to take her to a place that was down off 3rd West, and I can't remember the name of it, and they treated her like she was some psycho or something, and I was with her. And I can't remember the name of it, so she just like, they're all they're going to do is put me somewhere and lock me up, and they're not going to do anything for me.
Did she do any jail time?
No, she's never done jail time.
Really? And she had only been on the streets for 6 months.
Never jail time.
Never jail time, clean record.
Clean record.
She really just needed help with her addiction.
Just really needed help. She would go up to the hospital. What hospital? That.
LDS.
So she had kind of a history of going up there a couple times, and they'd lock her up, let her stay for a couple days, and then say, okay, you got to go. So she detoxed for a couple days. And then she said, I can't, what am I going to do now? And they give her anywhere to go. It'd be like, hey, here you go. Nowhere to go.
Yep, back on the street.
And would she get apartments for periods of time on her own and a job? And
She
where
would for a
could-
period of time, and then she would have a job, and everything would be fine. And then she
What
would.
kind of jobs was she getting?
She was working at gas stations. She loved working at gas stations. She worked at Maverick. She worked at another couple gas stations. She worked at Home Depot. She was cashiering. She loved to do that kind of thing, but she also loved to be a nurse. She did try to be a nurse for a while, but she got too emotionally connected to people. You know, she'd come home and cry, and I lost so-and-so and stuff like that. So, and we tried to get her to do that, but it's just, for her, it was too emotional. You'd get too emotional with people, you know, too close, like her, you know, like all of us. You get close to your customers, your family members, your friends, that type of thing. So,
Yeah.
I just think she...
So to pick up on the story at the end of her life, Ty, when did you first meet Candace?
I met Candace probably about maybe 5-6 months prior to her passing away. This is unfortunately, first of all, I want to say I really, my condolences to you. This no parent should ever have to lay their child to rest. We shouldn't even be having this conversation. And if I ever met you, it shouldn't be underneath these circumstances. So I just want to really a heartfelt this is why I am the way I am with people, because they're attached to someone. And my hope is always that they are reunited with their families, and when they are, I want somebody to say, oh my God, you don't look like what you've been through. Someone took care of you. This is why I bring out combs and brushes and shampoos and toothpaste and toothbrushes and clothes and socks and underwear and food and tents. This is why. Because there's someone's child. There's someone's mom. There's someone's daughter. There's someone's niece, cousin, grandmother. The system is broken. I, myself, have tried to get people off the street into rehab and into detox. And I have been there when they've said, are you high? And they've said, no, I haven't used in 2 days. And they've said, well, we can't take you. You got to go use. And then you've got to come back in here. And I'm like, wait. They don't want to use anymore.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here with them. Nope. They have to have used in the last 24 hours.
That's a resource center?
Yes. Yes. VOA.
Wow.
So I have to let them go use.
Yeah.
Go use. Now I got to track them back down, because sometimes they have to go through great lengths to go and find it. If you're a woman, you've got to be willing to give your body to somebody in exchange for that fix. And if it gets you good enough, I mean, you went from using heroin, you went from using meth, to now they're throwing fentanyl in there. It's stronger. Now it's going to keep you. Now you're not going to come back and meet up with me tomorrow for me to take you back to detox. Now I'm not going to find you because this guy's got the good stuff. And I'm not going to see you until you're hurt, till you're raped, or till I get a phone call that they just found you in a tent. The system has to change. There's been times where I've been trying to get people into rehab, into detox, and they're like, what Medicaid do they have? And I'm like, they don't have Medicaid. Or they have Medicaid. What kind do they have? Molina. We don't take Medicaid, Molina. We only take Medicaid Select You or whatever. And I'm like, Medicaid should be freaking Medicaid. You've got someone that's trying to get off drugs. Take the damn insurance. Or they're like, oh, no, we only do private. They've got to pay, $3,000 a month or $5 million a second or whatever to be here. And I'm like, so Utah has a big problem with putting up a lot of barriers to keep people trapped in this sick cycle of struggle. And it seems like they don't want to do what they need to do to fix this. Instead of us And this is some of the stuff we were talking about. We were talking about defunding the police. You don't need to keep giving money to the police. You don't need to keep feeding into these luxury apartments. When I talked to City Mayor Mendenhall a couple years ago and said, why are you not building places for them to go? She said, it takes too long to erect a building. But if you erected these buildings, people could get off the street. If you took some of this money from law enforcement and you put it into these programs like we were asking you to do, there would be more detoxes. There would be more beds. And as hard as it is to get a woman into detox, I tried for months to get a guy that was trying to get into detox. With his wife went when they had their baby taken away. He was trying to get into detox, and they told me every day at Odyssey House, you got to call us at 10. You got to call us at 10. I was calling at 9:45, 9:59, 9:58 and a half, 10 o'clock. Sorry, we don't have a bed. We don't have a bed. We don't have a bed. To the point where he thought I was playing with him. You're not really trying to get me in there, Ty. Yes, I am. Let me send you my call history. I'm calling them every single day. And if I get a bed, I got to send him out to Twilla, or I got to send him to Brigham City, or I got to send him to... He's in Salt Lake. Why don't we have something near where he's at? Why is there an issue? There's got to be something where, I mean, all these other countries have free medical care, the UK and all these other places. Why don't we have that? Why don't we have that here in the US? And when someone's trying to get off of drugs, that absolutely should be a free freaking service for as long as they need it. I don't understand why there's so much red tape. I don't understand why it's so hard for people to get the help that they need. You know, that's frustrating.
Well, could it be like the drug problem has gotten so big? I mean, Odyssey House.
They didn't create the drug problem.
Well, I mean, it's so many people who need it, right?
Right.
And I think that so many people are on the waiting list or trying to call like you found. Could it? I mean, how do you tackle a problem that is so enormous when there's so many people that have that same problem, and there's just only limited resources? Do you ask the government to put more money into it, or do you ask for more nonprofits like the Other Side Academy, or how do you begin to address that?
I mean, let's keep it real. The government's got the resources, they've got the money, they don't want to put it here. The Other Side Academy is one option, but I'll tell you this: when I had Camp Last Hope going, I didn't say you've got to be clean and sober before you can come stay here, right? You need a stable place to go. Let's go. We scouted out this place. This is where we're going to be. When people knew that they could leave and come back, Rich, and their stuff was still there, when people knew that they were going to be safe, they were going to be warm, when people knew that the police, the law, health department weren't going to come and take their stuff and throw it away, they did it on their own. Mm-hmm. They did. Give me a safe place to be and let me show you who I really am.
Yeah, I think it's not so
let
much.
Me show, so this is what you do when instead of you building all these luxury buildings, you go and you do something kind of like an Other Side Academy Village. Build it and they will come. So you build. Why can't they have a luxury building? If anybody deserves the red carpet to be rolled out, it's them. Mm-hmm. They've been through it. Build a place for them to go. Bring on-site services, and let's go. You're required to do this. And this is how you do it. And everybody starts to detox at once. I'll tell you, last year, over there by Gateway Mall, there was a 2-acre stretch of land that former Mayor Ralph Becker wanted to either turn into he wanted to extend the community garden that was there, turn it into a dog park, or turn it into a people park. I jumped on to a city council meeting and said, hey, I'm trying to do a mobile detox, actually, and I could use this land because I have a camp right here. I'm helping to vet the future residents of the Other Side Village, and one of the criteria is that they have to be clean and sober. Can I have this? I have a doctor on standby. He's already been doing mobile detox in people's homes. He's willing to come out to the field if you guys were okay this. We've got peer counselors set up, ready to go to support them through this, because we need to know where they're at. If you are using heroin and we get you on Vivitrol, you need to take that shot every 28 days. If I can't find you to give it to you, day 29, you're gonna use again. You're gonna relapse. And so we needed a secure place, and we couldn't get that. We couldn't get that.
Well, to get back to Candace's particular story, she needed detox.
She needed detox.
It
wasn't available.
Basic detox, and then a basic place where her things could be secure,
where she could be
and
secure.
she could just get off the drugs.
You cannot have multiple people with multiple traumas in one location. That's not how you heal. If we all have some type of an issue and we're all in a room together, we're not going to get better. If we all have the flu and you put us in a room and shut the door, we're going to stay sick, right? Because you're going to get a little better because now I picked it up, I'm going to pass it on to you, and it's going to keep going. We need to be in our own space. We're struggling with our own demons. We need to be where we can go through our detox, where we can face our traumas, and we can get individualized care, because you can't treat everybody the same.
Well, and another thing is they're so short on caseworkers, and nobody wants to be a caseworker because they earn $12 an hour. It's like, I just think the whole model is completely a failure.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you look at like the Other Side Academy, it's a peer-to-peer model where you're not needing a caseworker to try to check in on 12 people and who knows where they've gone. I think that there has to be work and recovery at the same time. Don't you think? Would you guys agree?
Work as far as employment work?
Well, work that they're going out and engaging in every day so that they have a distraction so they're not thinking about using the drugs nonstop all day, day after day, that there's something for them to do.
Yes and no. They do, but I don't think immediately. Not first starting out. When you are first
you need to detox
journey,
first.
Absolutely.
Of course.
You need to get your head straight. Because you're not going to be able to stay clean. You're not going to be able to focus on that job. You're going to lose it. And that's too much pressure coming out of the gate when you're trying to detox and you're thinking about your life. Down the road, absolutely. Absolutely. But these spaces have to be created.
Yeah.
You know, we're always taking funding from something. We need to put funding into. You need to invest in your community.
You hear that figure, $300 million a year for homeless services. And then we know that a massive percentage of that is permanent supportive housing. I think the last time I heard there were something like 2,300 permanent supportive housing units that are funded by taxpayers right now. And that model is you can only really keep that housing if you are disabled or you are not working, not having gainful employment. And what is that model going to create? If we look at the Magnolia Apartments and you look at the Palmer Court, I mean, it's drugs in and out and in and out all day long. It's just a complete and utter failure.
Absolutely.
And I ask you guys, like, when Candace was working and she had that focus in her life, was she able to stay clean when that was on? I mean, I just tend to think work has got to be part of the solution.
It does, but at the same time, let me jump in here. Addiction, it doesn't just come from nowhere.
Yeah.
There's a trauma that's attached to that addiction. So you've got to do counseling, and you've got to do the detox thing. You've got to do that and rehab. That's got to be a thing. So when you say that she was doing good, and then she would relapse, because they weren't addressing the root cause wasn't being addressed. And then she loses her husband. And that adds on to the trauma that she's already struggling with, right? And she lost him in such a tragic way. And then she's got these 2 babies that she had with this man. And just realizing that she's raising these kids without their father just adds more and more and more. And the one thing that she used to always tell me, Ty, I said, Candace, let me call your family. She'd say, nah, I got to get my shit together first. She was so afraid to disappoint them again. She was so afraid for them to see her like that. She was like, no, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta get a car, I gotta get a house, I gotta be living good, and then I'll reach out. And I'm like, sometimes you need to have your family there to help you in this struggle. And I didn't know the story. You know, sometimes you get people that their kids struggle with addiction or mental illness, and they're like, get out and come back when you're clean and sober. But there's so much to addiction There's so much to mental health. I've got kids out there that have been kicked out because they're schizophrenic. Their parents didn't understand how to, they have these outbursts of violence or whatever. And they finally said, when you turn 18, you're out. And they meant that because they couldn't handle it. And then you go with these guys, you take them to Valley Behavioral, and they get diagnosed, and they come out and they're like, do you know what ERD is? It's explosive rage disorder. They can't control that, but their parents just think that they're always just freaking out, being belligerent, and just wanting to fight them all the time. They can't control certain things. And I get that the parents get frustrated and overwhelmed, but we've got to go and fix this system so that we don't have any more Candaces.
Yeah.
Because here we have this beautiful girl that comes from a good family. She has this great upbringing. Something happens. She's introduced to self-medication, right? And once you start to numb that pain, every time that pain arises, they're like, oh, I'm starting to feel it. And they will use again. And we cannot continue this cycle. This is not okay. We can't continue a cycle where we're telling people, hey, you have a problem, but we're not going to give you a way out of that problem. There's not going to be any beds for you. There's not going to be any hotel vouchers for you. You're going to have to suck it up, or we're just going to have to put you in jail. You cannot incarcerate away addiction. You cannot incarcerate away mental illness.
But on the other hand, if she were incarcerated, she wouldn't have had access to the drugs. She could have detoxed. Obviously, she's behind bars.
Have you ever been incarcerated, Rich?
Oh, I'm not
Maybe.
saying
Sometimes
I'm not saying that's necessarily the solution. But we had Dave Droscher. If you
Dave Droscher, love Dave.
Amazing guy.
Absolutely.
He was very much like my kid. I mean, just extremely hyperactive, tons of energy, always getting into trouble, just mind going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and he just cycle of getting in trouble, getting in trouble, then till finally it was like his, I think, third or fourth or fifth time he was going to be in jail, and the judge was like, dude, it's time to just lock you up and throw away the key. And then he approached the Delancey Street and said, guys, will you take me? Because it was like rock bottom for him. And then he served time in jail. He got clean, and he was able to go turn around his life through a work program. And some people would say, oh, that's indentured servitude. That's slavery. You're just making these people work day after day for their room and board. But Dave's story is that absolutely finally made the change, because it wasn't 90 days, it was 2 years.
But that's
and
Dave's
it was started with jail. And then it went into a work program. I'd like to know what do you guys think? What could have possibly made the difference in Candace?
There's times that I thought that incarceration, I would know where she's at and she's safe, because especially on the times where we did not know where she was at, and she would run. She'd get in her car and drive. We had to pick her up in Arizona, but she could talk. She was so loving and intelligent. Yeah, she would tell the cop. She'd drive till she run out of gas, and an officer would fill up her tank, and she'd keep going. So I mean that's. So there was times that I wish I don't want her to be in jail, but at least I'd know where she was at and be safe maybe. But I've heard that the prisons are also, you can get drugs in there also. So they're not what they're cracked up to be. But I mean, I had those thoughts. I don't wish that on anybody, but there's times that, well, maybe she'll get picked up or something, and then we can start over. Try again. So yes, there are times that we thought about that.
And when you look at the cities all across America, this drug problem is so huge, and it's so out of control, and so many people are getting such cheap drugs. I mean, fentanyl, it's like this massive, constant, steady flow of a super cheap drug that so many, I think 100,000 people OD'd last year, and that's one of the biggest underreported stories in the media. What as parents, as somebody who's passed away that way, what do you think could possibly be done? Do you have any ideas?
What, for help programs?
To just kind of begin to get a handle on the problem.
Well, right
I'd
now,
say
the resources aren't there right now, for sure.
resources, and I'd say what she said. We need to have a place for our kids to go to get help. Our kids, our daughters, our mothers, our sisters. I mean, for her, it would be a place that she'd go and she'd say, oh, this is it. This is the place to make me get better. That she'd want to get better. And that's what I think.
People need support.
They need support. They need... She's been in places, and it's just like you're staying there. They're not doing anything. They're sleeping. They're doing
And obviously
chores.
90-day programs, like Dave pointed out, they just don't work. They create, I mean, when did ever anything happen in 90 days? It takes 4 years to get a degree. It's like...
Well, and then when you, like, I told Candace, I told her, you have to go somewhere where you're going to have to get help for a year. And that just, like, dropped her. She's like, what? And I'm like, it's going to take time. You gotta mend everything. You got to mend your soul, your heart. You got to mend everything. What you're going to do, what you're not going to do. And to get better for you and for your kids and your family.
So talk about a little bit of the trauma she went through when her husband died and how that happened.
So yeah, Cody McRae, same thing, struggling, and he'd be doing great for a while, and I guess he got slipped the wrong thing and just drove and couldn't control his emotions, couldn't control how he was talking. And just drove until they basically had to hit the car, turn it around. And he had already been in jail. He'd already been arrested a couple times for other issues. And he would try. I mean, same thing with Candace. He would try. And then he wanted to be shoot to kill. He didn't want to go back to jail. So that tore all of us over the edge, even her mom, whole family, everybody. And Candace took it the worst, I think, because it was her husband. So.
And father of her 2 kids. And
so,
how are her kids doing now?
Adam's really struggling, Trinity is, but I think it hurts all of them bad. I couldn't even imagine missing both my parents. So I should have brought tissues.
Yes, sorry. I should have had some too. There's some right there. Right on the other side of that cube.
But it's their mom, and they love her, and they think of her a lot every day, I'm sure, like we do. I couldn't even imagine. Yeah, she loved him a lot. She talked about him all the time. I'd have to send her pictures, and
that's just the thing, is nobody wants to be out there struggling. Nobody wants to be addicted. Nobody wants to be homeless. Nobody wants to go through what people on the street go through. They just don't know how to get out of it. You know what I mean? It's like being in quicksand. If somebody doesn't pull you out, you're just going to drown in it. Yeah. You know, and so that's why we really need to look into providing resources. People need mental health care. People need to have the rehabilitative resources that they need. We've got all these barriers, like I said, the insurances, this kind of Medicaid versus that kind of, that needs to be out the window. And you have to treat the family, right? It's not, Candace didn't have, what she was struggling with, it affected her parents, her children, her cousins, her friends. Everybody, you got to treat everybody as a unit. You can't treat one part of the unit. And so that's really what the big push is. And we've got to have leadership here in the state that's about providing the resources, the treatment. If you don't have leadership, because they're the head, right? Mm-hmm. And we're all following them. If the head's going like this, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Then why is anybody else going to step up and do what needs to be done? Everybody's following the leadership, and we've got to break away from that because people are out here dying. We lost 20 people this winter. And honestly, what people don't understand is that especially you got the wintertime, you've got the holidays, or when I see usage go through the window. During the wintertime, because when you're using meth, it keeps you active. You can stay awake. You're up for days. You're up for weeks at a time. And nobody wants to freeze to death. That's the biggest fear, especially when every time you turn and look, someone you were just talking to last night or this morning is now being carried off in a plastic bag and going into the medical examiner's van. And so people start using more so they can stay awake so that they don't freeze to death. During the holidays, people miss their families, they miss their children, and they're not at home. And so it's depressing. And so they use more to try to numb that pain. So it's not that people are just out here just using for the fun of it. And then I've got people that have bona fide, they have legit medical problems, and this is what takes their pain away. They don't hurt when they're not using to get high, they're using to get well, so that they can function throughout the day. So we've got to substitute, let me take you off of this illegal substance and put you on a legal substance to help with your pain. Then let's get you detoxed. Let's get you this. Let's work towards housing. But we've got to stop turning our back on vulnerable people. That is the problem. Why aren't there hotel vouchers? Why aren't there? The hotels are still complaining about they're not at capacity because we are still in a pandemic. People forget that. So why aren't you putting people in hotels and getting them off the street so that they're not dealing? This is the worst winter that we've had, I think, since '92. This was the coldest, wettest, snowiest winter that we've had in decades. And people were struggling to survive that. And how could you
and what bothered me so much is you were trying to track the data.
Oh my gosh.
And the police had to admit when there were 5, because they all happened within a few
days. And then
days,
they stopped
admitting, and they stopped providing any data to the media. And you had your own mechanism. Can you describe that and describe what happened to you, the way you were being able to count how many people were dying?
So I had a connection through a funeral home that would get the bodies of unsheltered people. And more often than not, these guys don't have ID. It's been stolen, it's been lost, or they have warrants and they're afraid if they go in and try to get their IDs reissued, they're going to get arrested. Abatements happen, their stuff gets thrown away. And so I had this connection at one of the funeral homes that would get the bodies of unsheltered people, and they would call and say, "Hey, Ty, we got this unsheltered male in. He was found behind this dumpster at this location. We don't have a name for him. Can you come in and identify him?"
That's why we wanted to know it was Candace for sure. If you didn't have an ID on her, how are you going to know?
So the only way
I would go to this funeral home, and I would say, "Oh, this is so-and-so. I know that his mom lives over here, or I know that he's got an 18-year-old daughter. She just graduated from Taylorsville High. She lives with her boyfriend over here. I know that he used to work here about 6 months ago. Maybe they'll have, and I became the person that they were calling because I'm out there every day and I know everybody. And I became the person that they were calling because if they don't have an identification for you, then they're Jane Doeing or they're John Doeing you, and they cremate you. So imagine if no one threw your daughter's name out there to the police. She would have been cremated and would have been a Jane Doe, and you would still be thinking she's couch surfing with friends when she's been gone for months. Every family has the right to know when their loved one is no longer here. People have the right to claim their child or their daughters or their fathers or whatever. They have the right. And that's why they were doing it. They were reaching out to me, and then somehow, I think it was a story that might have been published, but we don't know. It got back to whomever above their heads that they were reaching out and getting proper identifications for people, and they were terminated from their jobs. And my question when I called one day to talk to them, because December 18th, I'm going to tell this story. And the reason why is because December 18th, I threw a party for the unsheltered community for Christmas. And I was pulled aside at the beginning of my Christmas celebration for these guys. And someone told me, "We just found another deceased person over in this location." And I couldn't just, because I had so many volunteers coming in, and I couldn't just leave and go over there, so I had to stay at the celebration. And so a couple of, I'm going to say friends of mine, a couple of people in the unsheltered community that found him, that reported this to other people, they went over and said that the police just cut open the side of the tent and grabbed this person by the ankle and pulled him out of the tent. Medical examiner took his body and they went off and did their thing. There was never any police tape put up. There was never any do not cross this line. There was nothing that said you can't be in this area. And the tent remained there. And the contents within the tent remained there. So they didn't take the tent for, I've never been a police officer, but I'm over here like watching Law and Order SVU, thinking you take the tent and put it in a plastic bag, you dust it for fingerprints, you're checking the contents and seeing if you can find family photos, a phone that might have a number in it if you charge it. I'm thinking that you do this stuff, and all of that got left behind. And so these people went, and they went through the tent and looked through, and they happened to find a medicine bottle, a prescription bottle in the tent. By the grace of God, the label on that prescription bottle was on the bottle and still completely intact. And so, knowing what this person looked like, because they had seen his face, they Googled his name, and his name came up. And a photo of him came up. And it just so happened that this guy was running from justice, so he was a fugitive. I think he was wanted out of West Virginia, something like that. But it was a sex-related crime that he was running from justice from. And he was here in Utah. And he was here, now he's deceased in Utah. And I was like, so if the medicine bottle with his first and last name never got taken by the police, how do they know who that person is that they just got carted off? And is that going to be another John Doe? Mm-hmm. How are they going to identify him so they can notify his family that he's no longer with us? Because I don't care what you've done in life. I don't care where you're at in life. Everybody has the right to be laid to rest. Mm-hmm. Every family, in a respectful way, every family has the right to know where their person is. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, you know what? If they've done this and been so sloppy, and had we not thrown out, if people weren't like, that's Candace, we might have had that same situation. And how many times has this happened before? And this has to stop.
Well, I want to point out too, you're doing the job the police are not doing, capturing the data of homeless deaths, whether, I guess the medical examiner could tell you what they're dying from. And the people who were providing you that data, helping you out, are terminated. And so somebody ordered those people who are providing that critical data that could possibly connect the dots to find out whose sons, daughters, friends were passing away. They're terminated. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's this, it's just like there's this big cover-up going on. And I'm calling it a cover-up because we've been trying to get the grandma request through of unattended deaths. They said, we don't keep track of homeless deaths, but they keep track of unattended deaths, whether they're in apartments or on the streets or wherever. And I said, give me the data. We'll take it. Mm-hmm. And then crickets. They won't tell us anything now.
And it's like how many people have died outside of, Yeah,
and I wanted to shift gears. You guys really tried to find out the details of what was going on right before she died because you wanted to, there was some suspicious activity. Can you tell me, Barry, like what was the process you had to go through? And how you ran into a brick wall essentially, right?
Yeah, there's brick walls all over the place. I've tried many people trying to get help. First of all, the media never reported my daughter's death. There was, and you'll see, somebody getting hit by a car or something. It's all, but I think the reason that the homeless term comes out and you're shut down. So first of all, I was disappointed that she had no recognition of her death or the media, nobody. Second of all was I wasn't I didn't think law enforcement did their job very well. And I would say the reason I'm saying that is because it seems like they're all in cahoots, like a medical examiner, the detective, and it's kind of like the story changed over time. So as this went down, I wanted to know what happened to my daughter, what went on in that tent, and I wasn't there, so it's hearsay. Ty had more involvement with her in the last 7 to 10 days of her life in the tent. I don't know why she didn't leave the tent. She was in that tent for 7 to 10 days. Is that correct? If I say something wrong, just please.
Correct. Would not come out.
I will alter it.
When I brought food or clothes, and it was
The whole
busy
time?
temperatures then.
So the whole time, did she come out and talk when you brought her food prior, or the whole time just
That
stayed,
whole last
talked
week.
through the tent?
Talked through that, which was really strange because I know her. I've talked to her. Sorry, it was really strange because I talked to her before. You know, we knew each other. So now I'm pulling up and it's snowing and it's like 8 degrees outside and it's dark and it's cold and I'm trying to like, here, I brought you guys extra blankets. Here's some sanitizer. Here's some hand warmers. Here's some. And she's not opening the tent. She's like, okay, you can just leave it there. And then the person she was sharing the tent with, well, the person who owned the tent, she's like, he's not here. He's down the street. Okay, but open the tent so I can hand this to you. It's snowing. I want to put these warm, dry blankets out here. No, just leave them right there. Could not get her to open up that tent for anything. And it was really strange to me because I'm like, why are you not opening up the damn tent? It's Ty. Hello, it's me. Would not do it. And then after her passing, when I started getting pictures from Brenda, and she's like, yeah, what's this on her arm? We noticed that someone had carved from her shoulder down to her wrist their street name. And I'm like, and I'm kind of familiar with this person and their characteristics and their behavior. And I thought, this is a little weird to me. Why would you essentially brand somebody that this is not your property? And I tried to find out, like, hey, had she ever been arrested? Had he ever been arrested for this? Because it kind of looked like there might have been some things, maybe trafficking going on or kind of something along those lines. And even my friend in law enforcement wouldn't touch this. And I had somebody else from another organization. I reached out to January Riggins, who works with trafficked women. That's her specialty.
So you knew who the person was.
Absolutely.
Who was with her.
Absolutely.
At her death.
Absolutely.
That person wasn't interrogated, questioned, nothing like that.
Not at all. And that's what I was pressing.
Yeah, and I reached out to January for help as well to say, hey, do you know? And between her and I and our friends, we could not get anybody to budge. And she said, yeah, it does actually look like branding. So I'm like, okay, I'm not up in the night. But then,
and
boom.
is that something that happens to women on the streets?
Sometimes your handlers, your pimps, your whatever you want to call them, will brand women. Sometimes it's to teach them a lesson. Sometimes it's to let other pimps know that you don't touch her. It's like a territorial thing, but there's like.
And is a pimp very often a drug dealer as well?
Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to keep your girls strung out, right? So that you can keep them submissive, so that you can control them, So all I got to do is I got to feed you when I know it's going to keep you here. And absolutely. And it was really, it was strange to me that she wouldn't open up the tent. And then we find out that she had been struggling the night before, and nobody had called for help.
Struggling,
having seizures, and nobody called for help. And the story kept changing there as well. She was having seizures. She woke up and told me not to call for help. She went back to sleep. Was tattooing. So nobody's story has been consistent throughout this entire time that we've been trying to figure out what happened to her. Not the police. The only one that's consistent is the medical examiner investigator, who's like, something is wrong here. And
so the examiner
investigator's like,
up.
oh yeah, she's like, no, something's up. But again, stonewalled. And I prepared these.
Their story, the medical examiner, after they got the conclusion of a meth overdose. anyway, the stories did change. So, not to butt in, but
No, you're fine, buddy.
so anyway, my frustration is that, I was really excited right away, and I was calling the detectives a couple times a week, calling the medical examiner a couple times a week, trying to get the medical examiner to tell the police they need to investigate this person who's very possible involved in her death. And it wouldn't happen. So first of all, the medical examiner says this is the investigator for the medical examiner. And she's telling me that, yes, they have every reason to believe that there was possibly foul play here. Okay.
The examiner says that, and
yeah,
the
told that
investigator
on the
for
phone.
The
On the
examiner,
phone,
yeah.
yes.
So both.
Well, it's the investigator
For the
for the examiner.
Okay.
Yes, they had reason to believe there's possible foul play. Okay, so I wanted them to report that to the detective. And that's why I kept calling to see, I kept pushing, trying to get something going, because I wanted the fellow that was there on site to be questioned, investigated, or something, and nothing would ever happen. So what happened was when you let us know about the video that he took of her dying, the detective told me that he was going to go out and he was going to do a surprise visit. He didn't want to let him know, give him a heads up that he was coming to get that video or his phone.
Mm-hmm.
They were just going to surprise him so they could get it so he don't run.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that never happened. And I called back and say, did you get the video? Did you go down and get his phone yet? No. I have my policeman out there trying to get something on him. We're watching him close. We're looking for something to bring him in on. Well, yeah, okay.
And
So
you had
nothing
you
ever
had
happened.
contact with, was that the medical examiner investigator, or was that a detective?
No,
This
that's
is
the
a
police
detective.
Was that a homicide detective?
I don't know. He was the detective assigned to the case. I don't know what type of detective, but he was my only contact. He's the one that called me and told me we found your daughter deceased in a tent downtown. So my questions to him was, okay, I mean, I just have common sense, okay, but when your daughter's found naked, I left for work, it was 8 degrees, she's naked in a tent, and they want to tell me that the reason she's naked is because, when people do drugs, this is all a big cover-up to me. When people do drugs, they end up taking off their clothes, or what. So, okay, I don't want to believe that. If it's a fact, it's a fact, okay, but that's what I was told. The branding on the arm, so they're believing everything that this person says, I thought she was sleeping, so I wrote on her arm. I thought she was asleep, and I thought I'd play a joke on her and write that on her arm. No, there was bruising underneath. It broke the skin, the pen that was used. There was burn marks. There was burn marks on her arm. We knew when we seen her in the viewing. We finally got to see her. We took a picture because this is foul. This isn't her. Something happened in that tent. But we couldn't get anybody to research it or do anything, investigate it. So anyway, he told the police, yeah. First of all, there was apparently there was drugs and money in the tent, and he told the police that was hers. That was Candace's stuff. And so they left him sit in the police car. He actually slept in the back of the police car while they were processing the crime scene and my daughter carrying her body off. He slept in the back of the police car.
Meaning the guy who was with her.
The guy was with her, yeah. So he was treated like gold, like there's no involvement. And I get it. You're not you're innocent until proven guilty. I get all that, but with a guy who's a career criminal, he has a record. He has a record of hurting women. He has a record of drug sales and prostitution. He's well known by all the police in the city. Why aren't you questioning him? My daughter's dead. Piss me off. So, to move on, and I still don't understand that situation as far as her being naked. I don't have an answer to that. I mean, can you tell me, being around people and drugs, I mean, is it normal for her to take her clothes off?
I have been doing this all my life, and I've never seen anybody, and it's not even that. I mean, it is that she was naked, but her clothes were never recovered at the scene either.
No kidding.
So where's her clothes?
Is this why she didn't leave the tent?
And you're asking why she didn't get out of the tent. She didn't have any clothes on.
I
mean, what?
I believe she was being groomed for prostitution.
Blankets in the tent.
And another thing is,
It makes sense.
I'm a huge support out there to these guys, and I take their lives very seriously. Everything. I'm not intimidated by anybody out there, and so sometimes I wonder, like, if people won't tell me things, because I'll go right to the person and I'll confront them. Like, hey, so where's her clothes? Give them back so she can leave. Is this why you take him to hold her? You know what I mean? So I sometimes I think, like, did she not want to say anything because she knew I would track him down and confront him? Or, like, this is something that will forever play through my head on what could have been done wrong, differently, you know? It just doesn't make sense. Nothing's making sense. And the more answers we were asking, and I really thought this was going to go on the right track. I did. When the examiner's investigator called and said, oh, no, this is definitely, okay, we're doing, and I'm like, okay, good, they're on this. They're going to take this seriously. And then, boom, I'm contacting these guys. How are things going? And they're like, oh, okay, I talked to the detective. And then all of a sudden it's like, I'm leaving messages, no answer, leaving. Then he came back after a couple weeks and said, I was on vacation or something. So I'm like, okay, well, then he's going to pick back up and we're good as gold. Let's go. And then it's like, no, nothing. Nobody's returning calls. Like, what? How do you just ghost somebody's family?
Yeah.
How do you
And they just stopped returning your calls?
Yeah, yes. I called him last week just because we received a card in the mail from the medical examiner saying about if our family needs counseling or any help due to a death of an overdose. So we knew that's the point where I felt like, oh, they got the toxicology report back. Let's call the medical examiner. So I called him and said, yes, we did get it back, and it was an overdose of meth. But from the day one, before the police or anybody knew what was going on, they were calling it an overdose. Oh, yeah, we got your daughter down here. We found her dead in the tent. Oh, yeah, she's naked. Oh, it was definitely an overdose.
And who are you to say that? You're a police officer. You're not the medical examiner.
So I did a story about 6 months ago because I happened to arrive on the scene, a crime scene, where 3 people had been hit in the head with a hammer by the same man. And these people had big, gouges on their heads. They were all homeless, and they were being questioned. And I was like, they had the man in custody who did it. And I was like, there were like 4 officers on the scene. I was like, so he's going to get put away for a long time, I would assume. And he's like, oh, yeah, he's going to jail. He's going back to jail. And I said, and I got his name. I got the police report. I looked him up. He had done this 7 times in the past 5 years, victimizing homeless people. He had been going around smashing his cart was another case. He assaulted a police officer and was back out on the streets. He just kept hurting homeless people over and over and over. He was homeless himself. But it's like I tried to call Attorney General Sim Gill's office. Didn't get my phone call returned.
And I did that too.
Yeah, I was like, so what? Why is this particular guy getting out so quickly? And he actually got into Odyssey House at one point for rehab, from jail right to Odyssey House, and then left after a few days, and then victimized more people. And it's like the criminal justice system is Daniel On, who ran for DA against Sim Gill. She said there's people who are above the law, white-collar criminals, they'll never be convicted. We know all about that. But there's also people below the law, where if they're committing crime against people who are already at the bottom, it's like, why spend the time and resources going after them? And so I would like to have you guys say to Sim Gill's office, to the mayor's office, what would you like to see done at this point, Barry?
Well, I'm still hoping for an investigation. If they close the case, I'm sure there's a big rush. It's a homeless person, even though she's been on the street 6 to 8 months. That's the label, homeless. You don't get any help, no recognition, and that's what's very upsetting. Is I just
like
want I want justice for my daughter. That's what the whole thing's about. I don't think this should have happened, and I don't know for a fact, but I think the fellow that was there is very much played a part in her death. To video her dying, where she's struggling to stay alive, and he's yelling at her. I mean, I didn't see the video, but Ty did see the video. One of her partners seen the video, and a couple of other homeless people seen the video. So it's this guy, and he's still on the street. So he's running women out of different other hotels, motels, whatever.
He's a professional victimizer of homeless women.
He's well known by the cops. The police know this guy. They know he deals drugs. They know he runs prostitutes. And what's being done? Nothing. Oh, he's a hero because he reported her death. That's what I'm hearing. Oh, well, he didn't do anything. He just reported her death. So they're making him out to be a hero for that. It's like, come on, dude. She was naked in a tent, 8-degree weather. She was branded on her arm. I disagree with all that. You know, common sense tells you, and I bet any jury or anybody who's seen her arm, it wasn't just a marker. You know, it was gouged into her skin.
It was a
and
meat pan.
Here's what changed at the medical examiner's office. So it went from that, once they got the drug deal back, or the toxicology report back, now all of a sudden they said, well, it was just marker. It wasn't cut into her skin. It was just a marker drawn. No, it wasn't. We got we got a picture of it.
The medical examiner said that?
Yeah, well, the investigator for the medical examiner. Okay. So it's like, okay, so now the cop can close the case. The medical examiner is going to downplay it like, oh, he just wrote on her arm. And the police they believe his whole story, you know, of okay, he just reported her of being dead, and it was her drugs and money that were in the tent. And yeah, why was she naked? Why did he take a video of her dying? This is sick stuff to me.
Call 911. Why
didn't he have them out there when she had the first seizure? She was ill the night before. That might have saved her life.
So he was sitting there videotaping
her
while
dying.
He could have called 911.
Her dying.
He said
wow.
that she.
Oh,
He said that she woke up at one point and told him, I'm fine. It's just a seizure. You don't need to call for help for me." And that she went back to sleep, and he was tattooing. He told me he was tattooing her, and thought she had fallen asleep while he was tattooing her. The picture that I got, Brenda said no, it was carved in. We tried to scrub it off before viewing her body. Oh, they couldn't get off. So they had to view their daughter's body with this person's street name carved into her arm.
And is there photographic evidence that it was carved in?
We took
have
pictures of it.
Okay.
And they sent me
it
the
was
photos
bruised
as well.
underneath,
we sent
discolored.
It
It looks
was
like it might have.
And as far as you know, this guy is still on the streets,
Yeah.
free
Oh, yeah.
man.
He's still.
They wouldn't even
he's still
question
running
him.
the streets like nothing's happened.
Yep.
And we're putting all this money into these abatement programs, but not into investigations of the deaths of homeless people.
And not into counseling services, not into rehabilitation services, not into hotel vouchers, not into affordable housing or housing. We're not putting the money. We're not allocating the funds where they need to go.
Yeah.
You know, and so people are left out there to struggle for the decisions of others.
And it's like I've had folks on from Pioneer Park Coalition and Solutions Utah, it's called now. They're a big umbrella organization working to solve homelessness, and they have a model in San Antonio called it escapes my name, but the model is you have an intake center for all homeless people. You either go to rehab, you go to psychological treatment, or you go to vocational training, but they take in everybody, and nobody is turned away. And that facility makes sure that you stay there until you're ready to get a job and you're ready to be a citizen again. That model exists, and Rocky Anderson was just talking about it. They've been talking about it. I'm just wondering what is preventing our state from spending the necessary money on that rather than spending $300 million a year to abate homeless people like you abate mosquitoes. I just don't understand it.
The mentality here is they just don't care. That's why I always say I'm tired of humanizing humans to humans. They don't care here. Utahns are all about patting their own pockets. The wealthy get wealthier. They're about their generational wealth. They're going to build it off the backs of poor people. They don't give a damn. They don't care. You don't live where they live. They make sure that you don't live where they live. You don't drive what they drive. You don't dress how they dress. You know, it's ridiculous. This whole classism thing and everything. Help people. Help people. If you don't want to see poor people, well, then damn it, help them not be poor. If you don't want to see homeless people, help them not be homeless. If you don't want to see people struggling with addiction, help them to not be addicted. If you don't want to see mental illness, help them get help. But stop blaming people for struggling when you're contributing to it. You close the largest shelter here. You make it difficult for people to get into housing. You won't change the zoning laws so that we can build tiny home villages and we can have shipping container homes and things. This system, and it's very evident, is set up to keep certain people where they are so that certain people can climb. And they're high enough on the ladder to where they don't care.
Well, I started the program by talking about the greatest asset America has always had is the socioeconomic ladder, that you could climb that ladder, that you could be poor, and by working hard, you can get ahead, and you can get up above and rise above out of your poverty. It's like what my ancestors did. My great-grandpa was a ditch digger his whole life so he could get his kids a decent life so they could go to college. Now it appears to me like that ladder, it's not only rungs have been removed from it, we're seeing the rungs be spaced further and further apart, so it's so incredibly hard to go from extremely poor and addicted to that next rung on the ladder. And I think being in America, that's our job, to make sure that ladder exists and it's strong.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
the job of everybody who lives here.
Absolutely.
Because if somebody's stuck, like your daughter was stuck basically for years, and you did what you could to help her get off, but there was just nothing there.
There was no
just
resource. People need
programs
support.
that could work.
People need support. Like when you were talking about Dave DeRocher earlier, love Dave, love Mo, love Samuel, love Joseph, love all of them, but they had support.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot expect people, again, to be in a quicksand pit and you expect them to get out alone. No, they need support. When addiction is pulling you down, when mental illness is pulling you down, when poverty is pulling you down, when despair is pulling you down, when depression, when you have all these cement shoes on your feet and there's no one else to help pull you out of there, those cement feet are going to continue to weigh and continue to pull you down until you're completely under. People need support. So we need to, again, put money into resources. We need to pay people more. We need to train people and teach people, because you get people who are coming in because they've got bills to pay too. So they're going to take this $12 an hour job because at least they can cover a part of their rent, right? Because they're whatever. But then they're going to be disgruntled because they're dealing with people that are struggling. They don't have the knowledge to be patient and to be forgiving and to be understanding. So they're going to come to work pissed off. They're going to take it out on people that are pissed off. That's not how that works.
Yeah.
And people look at me and they go, "We know you're getting paid for this. Who's paid you? The state? Who's paid?" I do this absolutely free. I have done this all of my life, and I have the patience to deal with this because I was taught by my father. You meet people where they're at, you provide what they need, and you just have to remain calm because they're not yelling at you, they're yelling at their pain. And they're always going to go after the person that's closest to them. People need help. People want help. Stop saying people choose to outdoor camp. Stop saying that people don't want to get help. Stop saying that people can, well, I went through a hard time in life. I couch surfed and now look at me. I'm a police officer. Look at all they've got to do is just get jobs. Stop judging people because your struggle is different from mine. My struggle is different from hers. His rock bottom is not yours. It might take you 2 times to go to jail. You might be like, oh, hell, I went to jail 1 time and I was like, oh, God, this is not for me. But then there's people that can go in 100 times. They say, I can do time standing on my head. Everybody's different. So we need to have different approaches. We need to have different facilities so that when people are ready, those resources are available. They need to be welcomed with open arms and they need to be treated like the human beings they are. Stop judging people. Stop looking at people like they're a case file or they're a burden or they're another homeless person. This is someone's child. I get people that call me, text me all the time. Ty, this is a picture of my son. Do you know if he's still alive? Have you seen him? I don't want to talk to him. I just want to make sure he's still okay. I get pictures all the time. Have you seen her? Have you seen him?
Well, you know what I don't understand? A very, very simple way to identify the John Does and Jane Does is to have a public database.
Hi.
Have they ever done that?
But you have to care, Rich, in order to do something like that. You have to care enough to put in the money that's needed for resources like that. There's a huge lack of humanity.
And I look. I have a list of the homeless resource providers.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's 130 nonprofits, NGOs, and I'm like, what's going on in terms of just identifying the people who are homeless and trying to reconnect them with any family member so there can be some kind of line of communication, some kind of just like lifeline. If your life is in jeopardy, here they are. They're willing to, put you up. But it just seems like there's nothing in place.
There is nothing.
And then Rocky Anderson was on the program earlier. He interviewed 20 homeless people. He asked each one of them the same exact question. Before they just took your tent and put it in a dumpster, what resources did they offer you? All of them said nothing. All like 20 people. We didn't get offered one single other pathway after our home, this tent and our sleeping bag is being dumped in a dumpster. Nobody is saying where you go next or what you can do.
And we've had that when we're out in the field.
And only you and a few other volunteers are out there actually doing that.
Courtney and I, we've said when the health department comes, we're like, hold on, you're taking their home. Where do you want them to go? They're like, they need to go to a shelter. This is before April 30th when they kicked everybody back out on the street when they closed the overflow shelters. What shelter? The shelter. There's beds. Mm-hmm. Are there? Okay. And how many beds are available? Well, they just have to call. Well, so we would call. And we're like, yeah, we were told that there's beds available. No, there's no beds here. There's no beds. And then we're looking at the health department person at Brooke going, you just said there was beds. Well, and then there's a whole bunch of us standing there and we're holding them accountable. No, you said there were beds here. So you're going to take their tent with their sleeping bag, their blankets and everything. You're going to throw that away and you're going to tell them to go to a shelter where there's no beds. There was another night where I think it was like 6 degrees and I was told no shelter. This is when they were doing the First Methodist Church, and 85 people, and I'm driving like a bat out of hell trying to get 200 in the building. You feel me? Like, oh, jump in, like hold on to the rear window. It's 2 blocks down. Like, let's go, type of a thing, And they're like, we're at capacity, but because it's so cold, nobody's going to be turned away tonight at the shelters. Oh my gosh, one of my girlfriends came from Logan, drove up with me, and was doing outreach that night, and we had a guy out there that was skinnier than my finger, that was really sick. I think he said he had leukemia, really sick, could barely stand, could barely move. He was so thin and so frail. We took him to Gail Miller first, because that was closest. That's a co-ed shelter. No, but he can stay here on the floor. So as soon as you walk into the shelter, there are people laying on the floor, and this Kleenex is thicker than the blankets that they get. And they're laying on this cold, hard floor, and I'm like, what the? No. This guy, can you not see the condition he's in? They said, well, then take him to MRC. So we take him to MRC. Again, no beds, no nothing. So I'm like, well, what do we do? I'm trying to talk him into going to the hospital. He doesn't want to go to the hospital because I'm thinking they can see him, triage him, see he's not well. Maybe we can get him assisted living. We could get him into the in-between, which is a place where they can go so they don't die on the street if they're terminally ill and homeless. Nothing. Then, not only were there no beds available, and he had to sleep on the floor, but then it's like it's 11 o'clock at night. He hasn't eaten for a while. Do y'all have even a sack lunch you can give? No. So it's like, okay, so my friend says, well, can we go down the street to Maverick and get him some food and bring it back? And the guy at the desk drops the F-bomb on her and is like, no, but F it, I guess go ahead. Like, are you kidding me? So we went down, brought him food back. So they're not even humanely treated there.
Yeah. Well, I think that this could create a forum for other parents who have had their kids die on the streets.
Some of the parents don't know their kids
who
are dead,
could
though.
contact
It's a Jane Doe, John Doe
us,
situation.
and we could start to create a forum where we could connect the dots. So, Troy, do we have people who have commented?
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Most of them when you were talking to Rocky, but there's a few others. But
Yeah, I'd like to use the comment section of this this YouTube channel. If you have a loved one who's died, and you don't know where they are, you want to try to find out, or you know they've died and you want results, you want an investigation. I think if you could form a coalition of family members who have all lost loved ones as you have, where there's been no investigation, I think that's the key to holding the police and the investigators accountable, because it just adds so much insult to injury when you're not getting called back now by the investigator, and the coroner's office investigator says that there's foul play. There was never any resolution. There was never any conclusion. Just no callback. That just seems to me to be horrible. But I really want to thank you guys for coming on. I think this is so courageous for you to do this, and thank you so much for reaching out to me and to Ty. And I'm sure that there's more people out there, and there's more stories, and I know they all need to be looked into. And I think this is the only way to do it. Humanize the story, show the pictures, show who they were, and show that we can definitely be doing a better job. So thank you all so much for coming on the program.
Thank you for having
Did you guys
us.
have anything else you wanted to say?
I just have to say one thing.
You're gonna give her.
Our daughter Candace, she was very beautiful, and she was loving and very strong-willed, and we are her voice because she's not here. So we have to be her voice. We want justice for Candace. We want justice for our daughter, Candace. We miss her and love her so much. And we just don't understand why the state of Utah won't do anything about this. There's definitely a case here, but you know, the extra legwork that they don't want to put in to try to find out what happened, and all the extra work they have to put into it, they just don't want to do that. They're being lazy. Why don't the detectives do something about it? So we want help on getting an investigation done on this, because we just can't lay low and just act like nothing's happened when our daughter died in downtown Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
And what is the police doing? What is the mayor doing? Nobody's doing anything. And what really hurt the most is, like my husband said earlier, they didn't acknowledge her when she died. You know, I watch KSL and I watch all the other news channels every day, you know, and I never once heard them say that they found a female downtown deceased in a tent, and her name was Candace. They didn't even acknowledge her.
I think that's the least they could do.
Yeah,
Provide a basic
they didn't even
description
acknowledge
of what
our
happened.
daughter. Somebody I mean, it's just outrageous. I mean, we are so upset about this whole thing. It's just, we just want answers, and we want this investigated. And so we want help. Whoever wants to help us get this investigation going so we can get this resolved, so we can actually start feeling like we can rest in peace. That would be really, really great.
Yeah, and I hope that everybody watching, if you have a couple of friends, 2-3 friends who are concerned about the homeless, understand the severity of this problem, share the video with them, because that's the only way this gets any traction. If people share this video and more people watch it, I'm so grateful you coming on, and with Ty and Rocky, because this needs to be a snowball that grows. Because if it never is known by people, like I talk to most people in downtown, homeless people are dying, what?
Yes.
And they just don't even know about it because our media is not covering it. It's not a big story. So if you could share this video with a few friends, that is the only way this is going to get traction, and this is the only way that the Attorney General, the police department, the mayor's office will respond to this. So thank you all so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for watching. Thank you for all your comments, folks. I'll go through your comments, and if you want to email us, if you've lost a family member or you have a missing person, go ahead and email us, richard@utahstories.com, and we're going to try to create our own database and hold the police department accountable for the people who are missing, the people who have died. I want to hear the stories, and I want to humanize the homeless and provide the voice of local Utah. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. We'll see you next time.